Hello, this is Bad Vibes. Today's stories are about the paranormal. Now, I know people have different views on the paranormal. Some believe in it fully, some don't believe in it at all, and some are unsure. Either way, I hope you enjoy these stories. Reading one story in the video, which happens to be a long one, is my good friend Lighthouse Horror. If you enjoy his narrations, please drop him a sub and check out his channel. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'm a 16-year-old male, and I used to be a bit skeptical to all things paranormal until one weekend at an abandoned house. To give you some backstory, I was with my two best friends at the time, Danielle and Julia. We were home alone and bored at Danielle's house with nothing to do. I can't remember whose idea it was, but one of us had the idea to drive around on some of the old dirt roads and check out abandoned buildings. There were a lot of abandoned places, and where I live is pretty far out in the country, surrounded by either farms or woods. So we went to the first two old tobacco houses, took a few pictures, and just sort of goofed off. We got back on the road and saw an unkept driveway. Keep in mind, hardly anyone lives on this road. We decided to drive down the driveway, despite Julia saying that we shouldn't because it didn't feel right to her. Not the fact that it would be trespassing, but that she was getting extremely bad vibes about this place. However, Danielle and I insisted. We drove down it, and it was pretty far back in the woods. This is where weird things started to happen. We parked the truck in a little clearing and noticed an abandoned house in the distance. However, before we got out of the truck, the front sensor went off, beeping like crazy. So did the back one. It was as if something was walking around the truck. The weird thing is, we were parked in a clearing, so there was nothing that could make the sensors go off. Even if there were, it would have gone off before we even parked the truck, and wouldn't have just randomly gone off in that order. Danielle and Julia were kind of freaked out, but I just ignored it. It wasn't until later that this would freak me out too. We all got out of the truck and started walking towards the house. I was in front with my friends walking a decent distance behind me. If I'm honest, I was showing off and acting fearless. I wasn't that scared until I saw her, a woman. A woman with dingy, unkempt looking hair and a colonial style dress looking around the corner of the house. She looked at me and just kept her finger up to her lips and hushed me very loudly. The feeling I had is almost indescribable. Imagine feeling all senses of safety and protection is gone, and you don't feel at all happy. My heart felt like it stopped. I started crying. I was so scared. I knew she wasn't human. I don't know how, I just knew. I turned around to my friends and screamed, "Run!" and started sprinting back to the truck. My phone flew out of my pocket about halfway back to the truck. My friend Julia told me that this had happened, and I told her just leave it. Now if you know me, you know that if I'm ditching my phone, I'm serious. Julia and Danielle got back to the truck. We tried to open it, but it was locked. Danielle reached for the keys, but they were gone, and so was Julia's phone. It was as if whatever this thing was trying to keep us there. Danielle ran back to pick up Julia's and my phone and found our keys. We got in the truck and floored it out of there, back to Danielle's house. You might think that it's just coincidental that we dropped our things, but the thing is, our phones and Danielle's keys were deep in our pockets, and it didn't make much sense for them to fall out on their own like that. Later at the house, we were all talking about the entire situation, and I was explaining what I had seen. My friends didn't even hear the shush, nor did they see the woman. I was so afraid that they didn't believe me, but Julia reassured me that the look on my face and tears were proof enough to her to run as well. We later found out that there had been a few sightings of a ghost on that road by workers at the Fort Pickett, a military facility nearby. I'm a female, and at the time of this story I was 16. It was summer, so school was already out. My parents were hardly ever home since work kept them away. My little sister was staying out with my grandma. I had decided that night that I didn't want to be alone, so I called a couple friends to come over. While I was waiting for them to get there, I had gone up to my room. As I walked in, I got a really bad feeling in the pit of my stomach, and it felt as if I was being watched. Now, mind you, I was completely alone in the house upstairs on the second floor. I brushed it off, thinking it was just my imagination. I walked into my own bathroom to find all my hair products and jewelry on the floor, and the window was wide open. That was when I started to panic. My first thought was that we had an intruder, and I ran to get my dad's rifle in the closet. I kept it by me while I hid in the living room behind our couch. After about an hour passed, I started telling myself that I had just forgot to close my window and the wind knocked over my stuff on my counter. There was a knock on my door, and a wave of relief rushed over me. I ran to the door and opened it, only to find no one there. I slammed the door shut and started panicking again. Were some jerks messing with me, or was it something else? I didn't want to find out. At the time I was thinking, where the hell were my friends? Just when I took my phone, I heard a faint laugh come from inside my room. I sat and listened for a moment. It sounded like a little girl's laughter. Of course, that just freaked me the fuck out more. In the movies I watched, that usually means get out of there, and fast. But the laughing abruptly stopped. I was so scared I didn't know what to do. Just when I thought it was over, a huge bang came from the kitchen. All the pans had fallen off of the pot hanger. I was so scared, I couldn't move. Then I heard the little girl's voice again, though this time it was right behind me. And she whispered, "Help me." I turned so fast that I could have probably broke my neck. And surely, there was a girl in a blood-soaked white dress. I can't tell you how fast I booked it out of there, never looking back. I stayed outside until my friends got there. I ended up going to my friend's house. I never went back into the house again. This happened just yesterday, so it's fresh in my mind. I'm not quite sure what to think of it, because it was just so bizarre and unbelievable. I might have just been sleep deprived. So last night, maybe at 11 p.m., I was walking around my block. My town is relatively safe, so I didn't feel in danger. Plus, it was a pretty night. I had been walking around for 5 minutes when a pale woman with blonde hair caught my eye from across the street. She was about my height and looked around my age too. I didn't actually pay attention to her after I first noticed her. I circled the block again, and she was on the same street, a couple feet in front of me. She was standing on the curb, staring at cars passing by. It was a main road, so even that late, people were still driving on it. I said hello to her, and she turned and gazed at me. I couldn't see her face super well, but from what I think I saw, she had no pupils or color in her eyes. She just stared at me. After a while, I asked her if she was okay. She didn't respond again and simply pointed to the road. I was really confused and didn't understand. Right as a red car started coming down the road, she stepped into the road. The car slammed into her, and it was a bloody mess. The driver immediately stopped and jumped out. It was a man in his mid-20s. We both spoke about it, freaking out. He called the police, and I went around the car to see the state of the girl. Once I circled around the car, she was gone. Not gone as in dead. Gone as in she wasn't there. The blood on the road was gone too, but not gone from his car. After the police arrived, they concluded that it was a big hoax from a kid who doesn't know what they are talking about, and some guy who went along with it. A sample of the blood of the car was taken and found out to be paint. I'm still not sure what happened. I'm still not sure if what happened was real. It felt so real, but I don't believe in the paranormal. I don't know what it was, if it was a dream or if it was real, but I remember it like it was real. I feel like I can't leave the house now. I don't understand anything now, and I feel like I'm going crazy. Has anyone ever experienced something like this?
Let me start this off by saying this will be a long read. I'm also going to tell you that what I'm about to type is something I've carried with me for the last 24 years, and I haven't really spoken much about it since I was a child, and I've never spoken about it on any kind of public forum such as this. You are free to not believe me. I, in fact, encourage you to doubt anything that you're told from anyone. I'm typing this message because as I've gotten older and I've spent over 2 decades developing a life, to the best of my ability, I've carried an immense weight on my shoulders that neither therapist nor psychiatrist treat as anything other than a method of repressing memories at best and the delusions of a lunatic at worst. I do not blame you if you draw those same conclusions. I'm typing this in what I believe has become the most publicly traded speaking place on the internet for the sole purpose of attempting to drop the weight I've carried and move on with my life. This is more of a personal cleanse than an attempt at intrigue. And if no one reads this message and it becomes buried amongst the innumerable posts on Reddit, I will have at least gotten it off my chest. I am not from here. And by here, I don't mean where I currently live. I mean where any of us live. Anyone reading this right now. It's now a few days after my 30th birthday, and this time of year always strikes me because I started kindergarten on my birthday when I turned 5. I thought at the time everyone did that. You turn 5, and when you turn 5, you go to school. I didn't realize my birthday just happened to coincide with the first day of school. And a little over 1 year later, in about 2 weeks' time, it will have been 24 years to the day that my entire world vanished. I was born in San Diego and lived in a poor suburb of San Diego as a child. I lived at an apartment complex called Lemon Vine Apartments that were a bit slummier version of the Lemon Vine Apartments found in Lemon Grove, a suburb of San Diego. My parents were divorced, but friendly. My mother was young when she had me, and she was beautiful. She was in her early 20s and was aspiring to be a model and would regularly take trips to LA to do photo shoots. She did glamour modeling for magazines. She had a darker skin tone, being 1/4 Indian not native, and it gave her an exotic look. My favorite picture of her as a child was her modeling a luxurious wedding dress for a bridal company. I used to sleep with that picture when she would go to LA, and I would stay with my dad, who worked for the city of San Diego. They shared custody pretty evenly, and we even did Christmas together as a family, even though they had split when I was still a baby. My dad, his girlfriend, my mom, who was single, and me. Maybe things weren't as good between them as I remember, but I was 6. So if there was drama behind the scenes, they did a good job of hiding it from me. On September 17th, 1996, I was staying with my dad's parents in Riverside, California. They had a small farm where they raised chickens, pigs, and goats. No horses or sheep or anything. But my grandma had several pet ducks that would eat seed from your hand, fly away and return every year like clockwork. My dad had to work at night for a week, and my mom was in LA, so I stayed with my grandparents. Schools back then were pretty cool with this kind of thing, and I was sent home with the sorts of nonsense assignments you'd expect of a first grader who'd just gone back to school after summer break ended. The 17th was the 3rd day I was staying with my grandparents, and my grandpa had told me to be careful outside because he'd seen a rattlesnake and wasn't sure where it went. So, since no one knew where the mystery snake had gotten off to, 6-year-old me decided to go hunting for it. In hindsight, letting a 6-year-old go looking around a farm for a rattlesnake was probably not in the Parenting 101 handbook, but it was the 90s, and I guess they didn't actually expect me to find it. There were woods on the property, but I wasn't allowed to go in there, so they probably figured that's where the snake had gotten off to. I spent all day outside playing jungle exploration on the farm, trying to track down this rattlesnake. And much to my excitement, when I decided to open the well house, which for those who don't have one looks kind of like one of those green electrical boxes on the side of the road, there it was. curled up, rattling away. I immediately slammed the door shut and ran to my grandparents' house to tell them I'd found it. Now, this might be my 6-year-old memory exaggerating, but I'm pretty sure that snake was at least 900 feet long, give or take. I found it though. I was excited to tell my grandpa I found the snake so he could do what he did and go out and shoot the thing. I ran in the back door of the house, which led you into the laundry room and through the kitchen. I paid no mind to anything until I turned left and entered the living room, expecting to see my grandparents, my uncle, and the neighbor couple all sat in the living room where I'd left them. Except they weren't there, and it wasn't the same living room anymore. The furniture was completely wrong. The hard and memorably uncomfortable hardwood furniture my grandpa loved so much was gone. The coffee table he made out of a tree stump was gone, replaced by fluffy grandma-looking furniture. A 3-person sofa with a floral design on it, the TV was in the wrong place, and newer than my grandpa's old sit-on-the-ground cabinet TV. The hardwood paneling on the walls was gone, or at least covered by blue wallpaper. The hardwood floor was a shaggy off-white carpet. The pictures of my dad, my uncle, me, and my grandparents were gone from the walls, replaced by paintings and pictures of people I didn't know. As confused as I was by this, I was more confused by everyone being missing. In my 6-year-old brain, I accepted that they may have completely rearranged the house while I spent the day looking for a snake, but I didn't believe at all that they'd all just leave me alone. And I didn't see anyone leave. I didn't see the cars go down the road. So I walked out the front door, which was attached to the living room, as they usually are, and thought maybe they'd gone to the chickens or the pigs. Both should have been visible from the front porch, but the chicken coop was gone, and the pig pen had lost its fencing, and there were no pigs to be found. At this point, I was beyond confused, and I was getting very scared. I didn't want to be alone, and I didn't see anyone. Even though they lived on a small farm, the neighbors that had been visiting lived just across the dirt road, so I ran down our own dirt driveway and across the road to their house, assuming that must have been where they went. I remember getting more and more scared as I ran to their house, and I remember starting to cry when their house was the wrong color. It wasn't the faded yellow house it used to be. It wasn't even the right house anymore. Nevertheless, I banged on the door. I remember that at this point I was crying quite profusely because I didn't understand what was happening, and I kept wiping my face, which covered it in dirt after having been digging around under stumps and logs for snakes all day. When the door opened, and a woman in her late 40s to early 50s answered, and I'd never seen her before, I just started bawling uncontrollably. Everything after this point is largely a blur because nothing was right. I knew where I lived. I knew where I went to school. I knew where my grandparents lived. But I met the people who lived where my grandparents lived, and they were not my grandparents. I didn't know them. I begged for them to get my uncle to tell them who I was, but my uncle wasn't there. Through a series of various police and people in suits, I was brought back to the town I lived in after spending what seemed like 10 hours in the local police station trying to contact my parents. I had my home phone number memorized, but told them my dad would be asleep. But when they called that number, the person on the other end had no idea who I was or what they were talking about. I was asked to give the police officers my address and sat in the local police station while the police in my hometown went to the address. When they finally called the station back, they were informed that the name of the apartment building was incorrect. Lemon Vine Apartments didn't exist, and the address I gave them was to an apartment complex called Merritt Manor, and the apartment number I gave them was unoccupied. I believe at this point they were operating under the assumption that I had given them the wrong name of the apartment and the wrong apartment number, but I did in fact live there. When I was finally brought to my hometown after changing hands a couple of times between police, I was asked to give the police officers my address again and was driven to where I lived. That was it. That was my apartment complex. But just like everything else, it looked wrong. It was painted a different color, and the sign that used to have a large image of a lemon reading Lemon Vine now read Merritt Manor. I took the police to exactly where I lived, and just as they'd said, no one lived there. From this point forward, the police attempted to contact neighbors, all of whom knew me, but none of them were who they were supposed to be. Every person who came out of the apartment buildings around me were the wrong people, and they didn't know me. From this point, they attempted to contact my father, which should have been easy as he worked for the city. But no employee by his name apparently worked for the city in any capacity. As day turned to night, and I spent endless hours sitting in the police station as they attempted to find any person in the world who knew me, I couldn't do anything but cry. A woman in a suit, who I think was either a detective or just someone who happened to work in the station, sat with me for several hours and tried to calm me down. She gave me a stuffed dog, a Dalmatian puppy that looked a bit like one of the dogs from 101 Dalmatians, and told me his name was Sparky. She said I could keep Sparky, and that when they found my parents, Sparky would go home with me and make sure I didn't get lost again. She said he was a good dog, and he'd protect me if I took care of it. During this time, they attempted my school. I told them I went to Shawnee Elementary. It was easy to find, really close to where I lived. But a school by such a name, you guessed it, did not exist. My school was now apparently called Anza Elementary. At one point, I was asked if the police had ever taken my fingerprints, and they had. In kindergarten, my entire class had our fingerprints taken by the police at the school gym for basically exactly this reason. Unsurprisingly, this did not help at all. They couldn't find my parents, my grandparents, my neighbors, my apartment, or even me. They couldn't even find me. I was too young to remember what my social security number was, but I severely doubt it mattered. They asked my birthday and any relevant information that could help them figure out who I was and where I belonged, but nothing I told them turned up any information about me. At some point during the day, I was briefly taken to the ER as the police suspected I may have sustained some kind of head injury. After being looked over by a doctor, they found nothing wrong with me, and I was sent back to the police station. I ended up staying with someone that night, and I'm not entirely sure who it was. Someone from Child Services, I imagine. I couldn't stop crying long enough to really focus on what was happening after this point. I'd cried myself to sleep several times in the police station and cried myself to sleep again at the house I stayed at that night, despite the woman who I was staying with, not the same woman who gave me Sparky, doing everything in her power to calm me. I clung to Sparky so hard, I'm surprised I never popped his head off. I didn't have my picture of my mom. I didn't know what was going on, and no one could find where I belonged. This didn't make sense to me. I was only 6 and just barely. I lived where I lived, and my parents were my parents, and my school was my school. They didn't just all disappear one day. In between fits of crying and waking up, I begged to go home. I begged for the lady I was staying with to try and call my dad again. I just kept begging to go home. Over the next few days, I was interrogated and questioned by different people at different times, at different places, at all hours of the day. Police, investigators, people from departments I still don't know, child psychologists, everyone under the sun was asking me questions. I was back and forth between the police station and the house I was staying at, until eventually someone told me that they thought they'd located my parents and they were coming to get me. Finally, I was going home. Finally, this was over. Finally, I could get away from all these strange people asking me the same questions over and over again. When the couple showed up to the police station, my heart fell into my feet, as they were not my parents. but they'd had a son that had gone missing, and I fit his description pretty closely. The woman started crying when she saw me, because she immediately knew I wasn't her missing son, but I was out of tears to cry at this point. Eventually, I was collected by Child Services, and I was taken to a foster family where I stayed for a few months. The police launched a campaign asking for anyone to come forward with information about me. They took my picture at the police station for the newspapers. I never let go of Sparky for even a second. They didn't want me to hold him in the photo because I didn't have him when I arrived, but I needed him, and would throw an immense tantrum when someone tried to take him away. They had me put back on the clothes I was wearing when they found me, but they'd since given me new clothes to wear. In those months I spent at the foster home, parents of missing children would come to the house to see if I was their child. I didn't realize this was what was happening until I was older and looked back on it. They didn't just pull me out and say, "Is this your kid?" They were a bit more subtle about it. The parents would come to meet me, and upon realizing I was not their missing child, they'd often leave in tears. Looking back at all these families that came to see me in desperation, that they were going to have their child back, I feel so horrible for them. It's a feeling I can't really explain, like a type of guilt. Like I wish I had been their child so they could have me back and know that they were safe. Most of those people probably never saw their child again, but I try and imagine that all of them were reunited, even though I know that isn't likely. This guilt was one of the things that kept me in therapy as an adult, but like I said, no therapist has ever bought my story or believed what I've said. The most common belief suggested to me has always been that I was abandoned as a child and lived in an abusive home, dumped on the side of a dirt road in the middle of farmland, and I repressed all the negative memories I had of my past. I didn't stay in that foster home permanently. Eventually, while my case wasn't officially closed, I needed to start going to school and I needed identification. I was issued a birth certificate for the date that I told them was my birth year, but the day and month were listed as September 17th, the day that I was found. I never understood why they didn't just use the date and month of my actual birth, but I imagine it was because they didn't think I actually knew what it was. My name was unchanged. I started going to school sporadically. One of the child psychologists who had seen me recommended I not be placed back into a full curriculum immediately and suspected I suffered some form of PTSD. I was put in a special class and was only made to go to school twice a week initially. Eventually, I started going to school full-time and changed foster homes a few more times. I can't really say how much time passed before it happened, but eventually I was placed up for adoption. I was never actually told I was up for adoption, so I'm not sure how soon after I was found it was. But eventually people started coming to meet me. But these people weren't looking for a missing child. They were looking to adopt one. But I definitely did not represent myself as a good candidate. I had a story that no one believed or could verify. I insisted my parents would eventually find me, and I rarely had a day that I wasn't crying until my eyes burned. This story doesn't have a happy ending. I never saw my parents again, and I was a ward of the state until I was 18 and went nowhere from there. My teens were filled with delinquency, and I did a brief stint in something similar to juvie in San Diego called Chaparral. I never went to college. I never really started getting my life together until I was around 24. I haven't talked publicly about this before now, at least not since I was a child, speaking to everyone who was trying to figure out where I came from. I still have Sparky. He's old and worn, still in one piece, no longer white, he's now a dark shade of gray. He sits on my dresser and is there, just like he always has been, as long as I've been here. So Q&A, while I haven't publicly brought this up or spoken about it in any large-scale fashion, I've told the story to people who wanted to listen, and I've gotten one question, understandably, repeatedly, including from my shrink. So before you ask it, I'll try and answer it as best I can. Question: what things are different in the place you came from compared to where you are now? Answer: I'm not really sure. I've been asked about countries, states, laws, planets, languages, you name it. The fact is, I don't really know. I was 6. The continents could have been completely different, and I'd have no idea. I wasn't particularly bright either. I mean, I was hunting for rattlesnakes. I also thought California was a country. I can say the President of the United States was not Bill Clinton. I can't remember exactly what his name was, but we had to learn it in kindergarten. I think it was Robert something or other. I want to say Robert Wilmer, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, that's my story. I doubt anyone will read this, and it will likely be buried 10 pages deep in 15 minutes, but now it's off my chest, in the open, and I can go to sleep with hopefully a little bit of weight off. Edit: I genuinely didn't think this post would be noticed at all, so I went to bed after I posted it and haven't checked it until now. When I get off work tonight, I'll try and answer everyone's questions to the best of my ability. Double edit: this post has garnered way more attention than I ever expected. At the time of this edit, there are well over 300 comments and nearly 1,000 upvotes, and my inbox is full of messages. I'm trying to respond to everyone's questions as best I can manage or am able, but it's currently very late and I will have to sleep soon, and then I'll return to replying after work tomorrow. I thank everyone for their support, and to the people that don't believe my story, you have the right and every reason to hold that belief. As people have begun investigating this, I am asking that if you find reports from the 90s of my story online, to please not post them publicly. I have a family now, and I don't want them to be harassed or accosted. Please feel free to privately message me. The inbox works best. I'm still trying to figure out the messenger system, and I'll respond to any questions you might have as quickly as I possibly can.
Back in 2011, I was having a really bad time health-wise. For the year before that year, and the one after, my lungs filled up with fluid as soon as the cold weather hit, and I was in the hospital for at least 10 days at a time. 2011 was the worst. For reasons yet unknown to me, the specialist in charge of my care incorrectly diagnosed me with tuberculosis and gave me drugs that would either kill or cure me. It nearly killed me. It reacted poorly with my diabetes, and my lung specialist was a douchebag who didn't care that I was throwing up for 3 straight days. I almost died from ketoacidosis, and I was in the ICU for 3 days, in the hospital for 13. I also had a gnarly near-death experience, but that's for another story. While I was in the ICU, passing in and out of consciousness, and completely unaware of the passage of time, I hallucinated a cat. I'd be on the edge of sleep, and something would jump on the bed with me, chirp, and curl up so I could feel the warmth and purring. Sometimes he would knead my leg through the sheets, waking me up. I saw him come in the room only once. He was a big black, long-haired tomcat with an aggressively cheerful disposition and huge yellow eyes, such that I nicknamed him Lambert in my head. I even asked the nurses about him, half out of my skin I was, and that's when I realized that he wasn't a real animal. I made a promise in my head all the same. He had kept me going by letting me think there was one creature there with me 24/7, keeping me tethered to life. So if we meet again, I would return the favor and look after him however I could. Fast forward 8 years to 2019. My childhood cat, Lupin, had finally succumbed to old age. She was born in 2000, and to try to deal with the grief, I was Facebook scrolling through local cat sanctuaries and rescues, and who should I see but a kitten who was the same exact match to the hallucination, spirit, dream, whatever that kept me wanting to stay alive back then. I was sure in that moment that I saw him, and I was even more sure when I went to meet him at the shelter. I saw the same white freckles on his shoulders that had less than inches away from my face as I drifted, and he purred in the hospital bed. Mom vetoed the name Lambert, so we called him Jet. He has chronic anxiety issues and no food security from being on the street for the first 3 months of his life. And he kept me on my goddamn toes while I was getting over the death of my friend. But he's got the softest fur ever and is a chronic cuddler, and I owe him a lot. He still chirps when he jumps onto my bed. I'm not exactly a gold star believer. My philosophy is weird shit happens, but I'm inclined to look at the logical explanations first. I know I was super sick and my brain was throwing up all kinds of nonsense. I know that 8 years is a long time for memory to change, especially of such blurry and confused period. But emotionally, I can't shake the feeling that I met this cat nearly a decade before he was even born. I ghost hunt at the Mansfield Reformatory in Mansfield, Ohio a lot. In fall of 2019, I had discovered someone lingering in the east showers. No one had known about him, so I kept him a secret for a bit. We got really close and I learned some things about him, and he visited me at my home, which isn't a problem for me. Mind you, I used my pendulum to speak to him. Months later, on another hunt, we discovered that he was being abused and was very badly hurt. He was hiding in a corner, scared for his life, so my father helped him out and escorted him to the hospital to get checked out. We went up a couple hours later, and he felt safe there, so we encouraged him to stay. After this happened, that's when I started to tell people of his existence and inform them of what had happened to him. When I first met him, I found out that he didn't know that he was dead. I felt like it wasn't my place to tell, and if it ever did become my place to tell, I knew that it was too soon. June 2020 rolls around. I invite some of my friends along with me to help my dad speak to him, because I knew that there was something that had to be talked about. Up in the hospital, another spirit had been harassing him and telling him what to do, and he couldn't escape it. My dad was helping him understand that he doesn't have to listen to this guy, especially because he has no superiority over him. He's basically just a guy who was trolling him. My dad started to slowly ease into it, asking him how it's possible that he hasn't eaten in a while, explaining to him that he's able to go through walls and leave rooms whenever he wants, telling him that he can leave whenever this troll is harassing him. My anxiety and intuition started to rise, but the anxiety wasn't my own. I knew that straight away. Something was telling me that he was nervous about what my dad was saying to him. I ended up taking over and explaining how we're all dressed differently, how we were all wearing masks because of the pandemic, because it's 2020, not the 1890s. I said, "Do you know where I'm getting at?" And my pendulum responded with yes. And right after that, I could feel tears coming. I said, "I can't do it." I couldn't tell him he was dead, but he already knew. I started crying really hard and felt a huge pang in my chest, the kind you feel when you have just been told a loved one has died. And I knew I wasn't crying, it was him crying. I've never felt another's emotions before, and the pain I felt, I knew was his, and so did everyone else that witnessed it. A friend who took an audio recording of the session told me that she heard a male's voice say, "Dead?" after I asked him where I was getting at. And when she played it for me, I heard it too, and we knew it was him. I cried for a good couple of minutes and was telling my dad how heartbroken he was to hear that. It was very hard for the both of us, but eventually, he grew to accept it. Ever since then, I've been sensitive and sometimes feel the emotions of the spirits I speak to. Sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's not there. It was one hell of an experience, but I love him to death, and I hope I never lose him. That's how close we have become. I was told we have a special connection, and I don't doubt because I feel it. Anyways, thanks for listening to my experience. I've been wanting to share it somewhere. So I've never really talked about this, but it all started 3 years ago when I was talking to this girl for a little bit. Her name was Natalie. She lived in an older house and had the entire basement to herself. I remember her saying things like how her house was haunted. I didn't really believe her until this one night. So me and my friend Nick are spending the night at her house, and I remember my friend laying down on the couch at like 9:30, and he was just staring blankly at the wall. I didn't think anything was wrong, and I thought he was just messing around, so I started calling his name. Yo, Nick. 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 Nothing I said could get a response from him. Meanwhile, I was across the room, and Natalie was sitting on her bed. After about a minute of him just staring blankly, he jumps off the couch and says, "I don't mess with that. I don't mess with that." Freaking out, and Natalie started laughing. It didn't really dawn on me until later that I think she knew what was happening. Anyways, I started laughing too, thinking it was a joke. About 5 minutes pass, and he calms down and sits back on the couch. This is where things get a little creepy and interesting. She had a screen door in her room that opened outside. I specifically remember as soon as I took 2 steps out of her room, every single light in her room, including outlets, all blew out and it was pitch black. It got really creepy for a second. We tried everything, and the only thing in her room that would work was the lamp next to the couch, right next to Nick's head. Anyways, this was all kind of new to me, and I didn't really know what to think about the situation. I then remembered things getting weird in the room, like Natalie was getting super agitated over the littlest things and wouldn't let me sleep in her bed. So I was like, whatever, I'll just sleep on the floor at the foot of her bed. I remember I couldn't fall asleep that night. I was laying there for a while everyone else was asleep when I had this sleep paralysis type of feeling. I couldn't move or anything. I remember this happened to me once when I was young, and all I could think to do was to pray and start saying the Our Father prayer in my head. When about halfway through it, it stopped and I just tried to go back to bed. About 30 seconds pass and it hits me again that I can't move. This is giving me chills as I type this. So I start praying again, and halfway through the prayers it stops. At this point I was like, whatever this is gone, until about 30 seconds pass again, and this time it's much more frightening. I remember it felt like someone plunged me onto an outlet, like I was being shocked through my whole body, and I was kind of shaking or whatever. It was just holding me down. I remember trying to move my arms as hard as I could to rip the blanket off of Nick to wake him up and help me. But in my head, I was saying Our Fathers, and it left halfway through again. At this point I was freaking out. I was literally scared for the next few months after this, and I slept in the same room as my mom for a month or so. It took me a while to kind of make sense of what happened that night, but I think some entity or demon or something, I don't know, tried messing with my friend Nick, and when I laughed and taunted it, it targeted me. But this story is not over. So this happened about 2 years ago when I moved into my new house, which I still live in today. I remember my aunt was visiting, and it was late night, around 2 a.m. I was just chilling, playing video games, doing my thing when I hear a weird sound to my left and right. I had my gaming headset on, so I ignored it and kept playing. When I thought I heard the same sound for the second time from behind my bed, I took my headset off and waited, trying to hear it again to find out what it was. I sat there for like 2 minutes, just waiting, when I heard the sound right next to me. Woo. It's literally all I could make out, and it was just weird and creeped me the fuck out. So I ran to my mom's room and told her something was making sounds in my room, and she was like, oh, it's probably the sprinkler system or some other shit outside, and went outside to look. I remember I walked back into the hall to my room and stood there waiting for my mom to come back inside, when I literally heard the loudest woo in my ear. I ran out of the house crying and freaking out, and my mom thought I was crazy. I remember hearing a voice another time while I was trying to sleep, and I just kept telling it to go away. Since then I haven't heard any other crazy shit, though I do get sleep paralysis sometimes. The most recent experience, I had what was like a presence of a woman in my room, and I couldn't move. I don't know, all this stuff is just kind of creepy to me. When I was younger in the 60s, we lived in an old house built before the Civil War. It was up in Oldham County, Kentucky, in an area known as the Devil's Backbone, on Dawkins Road. I was around 12 years old and had an encounter I would never forget. One night, I was unable to sleep, and I was laying on my side when I got this very uncomfortable feeling. I turned on my back and saw a young man with dark hair and a mustache staring at me from the foot of my bed. He was wearing clothing from the 1800s. I looked at him for a while before I lost my nerve and ducked under the covers. When I looked back up, he was gone. Several weeks later, I was upstairs in my brother's room, and I was home alone. Suddenly, someone loudly ran up the stairs to the door. I opened it, only to find a cold breeze. I left the house until everyone else came home. Sometime later, I was in town with my dad. We met an old man that said he lived in the house when he was a boy. He said the house was haunted, and that a young musician hung himself from the second-story window, which was my brother's room. I'm a water treatment plant operator. Been doing this for about a decade. I've been the night shift guy my whole career. The nights are normally quiet and can be boring if everything is going as planned. My plant has a few different buildings. The oldest is 60 or so years old. The main building is where I spend the majority of my night shifts, and is only roughly 20 years old. For more backstory of the area, this used to be a booming, energized area. This area was littered with railroad tracks and drifters coming and going on the trains. Our farms and factories were very bountiful back then. Now that you all understand that with success in the area, there's also a darkness. From the settling of the area, wars with natives, and even into the 30s and 40s of people being killed on train wrecks and bad business deals, the grounds are laced with darkness. The silence of night shifts can be eerie all on its own. Lots of bumps and bangs in the dim lit darkness. On the night that I'm about to speak about, everything started as normal. I came around sunset, got the nightly Passover, and began my work. Around midnight, I had to do my rounds around the whole property while getting the nightly pump numbers. I made my rounds with nothing but a flashlight around the main building. The oldest building is good walking distance away from the main building. I set out in the darkness, heading for that building. I must also add that we aren't in the nicest area of the town. However, I'm a big guy, and I can hold my own. As I made my walk, I got an uneasy feeling. I've gotten this before, but I have a job to do, and nothing came of it. I rounded the corner and unlocked the door. As I did this, the hairs on my back and neck stood up. Again, I have a job to do though. I opened the door and there stood nothing. I walked in and proceeded to get my numbers. As I turned to shut the door, I looked down the hallway to see a woman in pure white looking at me through the other door. I almost jumped out of my boots and pissed myself a little. As I came back to reality, I once again made eye contact with this entity. As soon as I met her gaze, everything in me said, "Hey, your life is in danger, buddy." Her face was distorted and started to shift around. I was now frozen as she shifted into what looked like an Indian warrior. His eyes were glowing. As I got to my feet, he shifted into a huge wolf creature. The growls were chilling to say the least. It snarled, then ran towards me. I didn't even have time to shut the door. I ran as fast as I could, screaming bloody murder. I felt as if it was trying to bite my backside. It got a hold of my pant leg and tore it to shreds. I stumbled and rolled, but somehow managed to get back on my feet. I darted to the main building, and as I shut the door, I heard a loud thud on the other side. I locked the doors and cowered inside. I could hear the thing growling and scratching at the walls. I got the courage to look out the window, just to end up face to face with the white lady again. I called the police and had them sit with me until the sun came up. No one else has ever seen the white lady since. It's still quite freaky, but I had a job to do. Please, someone, help us. We don't know what to do. It's getting so bad. It's been bad over the last 20 years, but this is the worst by far. Both of my parents grew up in haunted houses, and of course my siblings and I have all grown up in haunted houses as well. At first my parents thought my brother just had an imaginary friend. His name was Joe, and he lived in the closet. My brother woke up screaming in the middle of the night when I was a baby, so I don't remember. My parents ran in there, and he had blood all over his sheets, and 3 very long cuts on his back. They had bunk beds, and my brother was on the bottom. My parents said he was pale and wouldn't say a word. Things calmed down for a really long time, until I was 10. I had one of my friends stay over, and we were staying up really late, playing games, and doing what little girls do. We started hearing scratching sounds coming from outside my door. I had a cat, so I thought it was her. So I went to open the door, but there was nothing there. We ended up shrugging it off. Then it started again, and the doorknob started to jiggle, and it slowly opened. There was a dark figure standing there, looking at us. It was out of breath, and its shoulders were going up and down. Then it lunged at us, and we screamed, causing my parents to come in running. Nothing and nobody was in the house. My friend never stayed the night at my house again, and we stopped being friends shortly after. 9 years later, just little things were happening, nothing too scary. My boyfriend went off to basic training, and I still lived with my parents when I was 19. I had a dog, Zeus, who was sleeping on my bed, and he's a yellow lab. It was 6:30 in the morning, and I had to be up at 8:30 for work. He woke me up growling. Then I heard a weird voice in my ear speaking a language I didn't understand. When I started to open my eyes, it started growling in my ears. I opened my eyes fast, and my door slammed. My dog was standing over me, with his hair standing up, looking like he was about to attack someone. Everyone was already at work, and I heard banging coming from my parents' room. I got Zeus off of me, and jumped out of bed and ran to my parents' room. The cabinets were opening and closing fast, and things were being thrown everywhere around the room. It wouldn't stop. I turned around and went to run out, but the door slammed shut. My dog was running around the house barking and growling, and started running into the door. I said screw it, and ran out and grabbed some work clothes and got my dog and got the hell out. I dropped off my dog at my friend's house and went to work early. When I got home, my parents' room was destroyed. My mother was crying, and my dad was pissed. I told them everything, and we decided not to talk about it again, and went on with the rest of the night. My brother still lived with my parents as well. That night, his door kept opening and closing, and I kept hearing running in the hallway, so I thought it was him. I slipped on my slippers and stomped to his room. I was gonna yell at him to knock off his stupid shit, and when I opened the door, he was snoring. I woke him up and he promised me it wasn't him. He told me to leave his door open to see if anything happens again. I'm halfway down the hallway and my brother yells at me to run to my room and not to look back. But of course, I turn around instead. As I turned around, I see a large black figure standing in the doorway staring at me. It had large red eyes. I froze and started to whimper. My brother, being the protective big brother, came charging out of his room, telling the thing to leave me alone, and then it disappeared. My brother ran to me and led me to my room and slept on the floor all night. I didn't sleep. Now a year later, I'm 21. My husband is away in the army at the moment, and we are waiting for our plumbing to be done at our new house. Last night we had a bad rainstorm. I woke up to growling again and couldn't move. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure with red eyes just staring at me, and it opened its mouth so wide it could fit my whole head in its mouth. It had huge sharp teeth and a long skinny tongue. It screamed in my ear, and my ears started to ring. I wanted to cover them, but I couldn't. My parents come running into my room, covering their ears, but it stopped mid-run when they saw the thing. My dad came running to me and picked me up and carried me to his room, and Zeus followed. I was finally able to move and started shaking uncontrollably. My brother still lives there, as well as his girlfriend. We heard her scream, and then she started banging on the door, and then my dad opened it, and she came running in, crying and shaking. We all started to ask where my brother was. Before she could answer, he came out of his room on his hands and feet with black eyes, just staring at us. We all froze, none of us knew what to do. My brother then popped his neck and started running for us. My dad slammed his door shut and locked it. My brother ran right into it. My mom was screaming for it to get the hell out of the house and just kept repeating this while things were being thrown, then it goes quiet. My dad opens the door and my brother was passed out on the floor with his nose bleeding. When my brother woke up, we told him everything. He didn't remember a thing, but remembers hearing screaming, and then it all went black. Nobody slept last night, and we all called in and are trying to figure this out. Now it's the next night, and it's 11 o'clock. We are hearing growling and scratching through the entire house. We can't do this again. Please help. I will keep you updated as soon as I can. Thank you.